Can anyone look upon the well-preserved face of a man who died 3,000 years ago without fascination, fear, or disgust? We find something chilling and alien in the Egyptian obsession with preserving their dead. The mummy has inspired countless horror movies and tales of the supernatural. Yet if we turn from fantasy to science, we find the mummy also gives us a wealth of facts about the ancient Egyptians, their way of life, their ailments and injuries.
I'm John Rhys-Davies. Join me as we explore the secrets of the mummies, next on Archaeology.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket in the name of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. Good heavens, what a terrible curse.
It was one of Boris Karloff's earliest starring roles, the box office hit of 1932, The Mummy. The movie helped to fix the popular idea that the preserved bodies of ancient Egyptians possessed supernatural powers, even the power to kill. The mummy's curse is one of the most persistent legends of Egyptology. Bad luck, sudden illnesses, or accidents are all said to dog anyone foolish enough to meddle with mummies.
To date, no one has actually found any curse inscribed on a sarcophagus or carved in an Egyptian tomb. The story of the curse was the invention of an enterprising journalist trying to cash in on the mania for mummies. So if the ancient Egyptians didn't, as far as we can tell, associate their mummies with some type of curse, what exactly did they have in mind when they created these things that so frighten and fascinate us? Can today's scientists shed light on these forgotten dead?
In ancient Egypt, the kingdom of the dead was ruled by Osiris, who was murdered by his brother Seth, then torn into 14 pieces and scattered around the earth. Osiris's sister and wife, Isis, found all but one of the pieces, bandaged them together, and created the first mummy. From this legend grew a sophisticated practice of preservation that would evolve over 3,500 years. To the ancient Egyptians, the body was as important after death as it was in life. They believed that part of the soul left the body to visit the underworld at night, only to return to it at sunrise. But the soul had to recognize the body in order to return to it, so the body had to be well preserved. Should the body be destroyed, the soul would be lost forever. At first, the Egyptians relied on a natural process to preserve the dead. They simply buried bodies in the desert sand where they dried out. Egypt's desert climate even preserved the final agony of this man, who for some unknown reason was bound and sealed alive in a coffin, perhaps as ghastly punishment for an unknown crime. As time went on, the Egyptians developed more elaborate mummification techniques, and the mummy became more lifelike. They removed the organs and packed natron, a natural salt from the Nile Valley, around the bodies to draw out the moisture. The whole process took more than 2 months. Nasri Iskander is the director of conservation at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
The process of mummification is to extract the liquids and the moistures inside the tissues of the body, and also dissolving the fat materials between tissues in the body. And this keeps microbes and bacteria and viruses limited.
Once the embalmers removed the organs and dried out the tissues, they wrapped the body in bandages. They painstakingly wrapped each finger and toe individually. The heart, which recorded good and bad deeds committed in life, remained in the body so that it might be judged in the afterlife. The embalmers stuffed the cheeks and the body with resin-soaked linen or sawdust to maintain a lifelike appearance. Any materials used in preparing the mummy were buried near the tomb to prevent them being used to put a spell on the deceased. But mummification was only part of the ritual. Tombs had to be stocked with food and clothing to sustain the ka, a part of the soul which resided with the mummy. The Egyptians believed that models of servants, laborers, and ships placed inside the tomb sprang magically to life. The massive scale of the Old Kingdom pyramids, dating from 2600 BC, was inspired partly to deter tomb robbers. Ironically, they served only as beacons, attracting looters to the riches entombed within. Clearly, another plan was called for. Beginning around 1500 BC, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom chose a different way to hide their royal mummies, concealing them in tombs hollowed out of the rock in a desolate, narrow, easily guarded valley near present-day Luxor, the Valley of the Kings. In 1922, when most scholars had already declared the valley exhausted of treasures, English archaeologist Howard Carter made one of the most sensational discoveries of all: the intact burial place of the boy king Tutankhamun. Among the treasures was the royal mummy, encased in 3 magnificent coffins and a face mask of beaten sheet gold. The discovery brought instant fame to Carter and awoke popular interest in the exotic beliefs of Egyptian religion. As a boy, archaeologist Don Ryan was inspired by the stories of Howard Carter and Tutankhamun. His interest led him to the Valley of the Kings, where he now investigates the tombs of the unknown and overlooked.
There are about 60 tombs in the Valley of the Kings. About half of them are these spectacularly decorated royal tombs. What I've looked at are about the 30 other little tombs that have no decoration and have not attracted the attention of most Egyptologists and archaeologists. We've found lots of mummies of children and teenagers and males and females that give a broader perspective to the history of the Valley of the Kings rather than just big royal burials.
Most of the public's mummy mania centers on astonishing finds such as Tutankhamun. But mummification wasn't reserved strictly for royalty. Of the millions of mummies that once existed, only a small percentage were of noble birth.
One thing that really does excite me is we're looking at tombs that have been ignored in the past, and as we examine these tombs, we're finding all sorts of exciting things that nobody ever expected. That is, tombs that have mummies in them, hitherto unknown, and objects and things that are really adding a new dimension to the history of the Valley of the Kings.
Before it attracted the attention of archaeologists and historians, the valley attracted its share of unsavory characters. Robbers and treasure hunters have sought the gold of the pharaohs for centuries. 100 years ago, enterprising businessmen found a use for the mummies themselves, grinding them into medicinal powders, stripping their wrappings to make paper, and even using them to stoke the fireboxes of locomotives. During a tour of Egypt, American author Mark Twain wrote that he heard a railroad engineer remark, "Damn these plebeians, they don't burn worth a cent. Pass out a king." Perhaps the most famous explorer and exploiter of the Valley of the Kings was a former circus strongman named Giovanni Belzoni. A discoverer and plunderer of tombs, Belzoni described one experience in a pitch-dark burial chamber. "I sought a resting place, but when my weight bore on the body of a dead Egyptian, it crushed it like a bandbox. rocks. Every step I took, I crushed a mummy in some place or another. In 1817, Belzoni recorded how he dug into Tomb 21 and found 2 well-preserved mummies with long hair lying on the floor. Now, Don Ryan is investigating this forgotten tomb.
They're a little higher than this. It took us about a month to dig through the debris to reach the entrance. And I was very excited about the possibility of finding these 2 female mummies described by Belzoni intact. But disappointment came quickly. And the further I went into the tomb, I found more and more legs, hands, feet, and all the parts of 2 female mummies extremely badly damaged. One that was missing a head.
When Ryan placed all the body parts together, both of the female mummies had their left arm flexed and their left hand clenched. This was believed to be a symbol of royalty. But there were no inscriptions in the tomb to indicate who the 2 privileged women were. Ryan's quest for forgotten tombs led him to a vault known as Tomb 60.
Well, Howard Carter found this tomb in 1903 on his great quest to discover a large decorated royal tomb. And he ran across this little tomb. It was very small, crudely carved, and undecorated. Had no interest to him. He noted there were a couple mummies inside and proceeded to cover it back up and went on and found a few days later a big royal tomb, just as he was hoping.
With the help of Carter's field notes, Ryan began searching for the forgotten tomb. He swept the limestone bedrock with a broom and in just half an hour found the edge of a pit. It concealed a stairway leading down into the rock.
And what we found was a tomb that had not been damaged by water, and we knew there was probably a mummy inside, and sure enough, in the burial chamber, we found what appears to be a royal female mummy lying on the floor.
About 25 years ago, the American Egyptologist Elizabeth Thomas said that if Tomb 60 were ever to be rediscovered, that perhaps the mummy of Hatshepsut would be found inside. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for 21 years. She became as legendary as Cleopatra or Nefertiti. 3,500 years ago, she commissioned this magnificent temple built just outside the Valley of the Kings. Her tomb has been found very close to Tomb 60, but there was no mummy inside. Had priests hidden it from robbers in an inconspicuous tomb close by?
And sure enough, when we entered the tomb, we found a very wonderfully embalmed mummy of a female striking this apparent royal pose. But I think it's important to stress that even though it's fun to speculate in history and Egyptology, with the data we have now, we have no way whatsoever of positively ascertaining the identity of this mummy. So if people want to speculate about Hatshepsut, that's fine.
Today, Ryan continues to uncover artifacts which bring to life the burial rituals of the ancient Egyptians.
These big whitened jars are typical of the 18th dynasty for caching embalming materials. So it's possible these came from a large pot that's been whitened and obviously broken.
But rituals are only one piece of the puzzle. What can modern science tell us about the life of someone who has been dead more than 3,000 years? The science of mummies took off in the 1960s, when X-rays, the microscope, CAT scans, and chemical analysis all came to the archaeologists' aid. Mummy wrappings were tested and found to contain preservatives such as beeswax, resin, and glue.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Recently at Knoxville's McClung Museum, this excellently preserved mummy was chosen for testing by Doctors Jim Harris and Brian Ingalls, both orthodontists. Dr. Harris's interest in physical anthropology led him to the well-preserved skeletons of Egypt. He is now among the world's foremost authorities on mummies and pioneered the use of X-rays for studying mummies.
Brian, do you think we should take the film holder out and put it on later?
Yeah, I think so. That's why I raised it up. I think we've got...
Because it goes in easily.
Inscriptions on the mummy case say that this was Jed Cons Iwef Ankh, or Jed to his friends, a priest and scribe of Luxor a little less than 3,000 years ago. Earlier tests suggested he had died in his 20s of unknown causes.
X-rays are one of the tools, one of the many tools that can be used to look at disease and ascertain what the individual did indeed die from.
Radiology is important to Harris for another reason. X-rays do not destroy the mummy.
We have never been involved in dissection, for example, of mummies. We've always left them intact, and X-rays permit us to do that.
Harris and Ingalls share another goal besides identifying disease. They also want to compare mummies in order to determine family resemblances. To do this requires positioning the X-ray source at exactly the same distance and angle away from the head. They use a laser beam to line up Jed's ear and adjust the entire head to the right position.
There you go. Now it's just hitting the... What's really wonderful is the mummy's head is almost vertical, because sometimes they're tipped, you know. Sometimes we have to tip the machine extensively, and this is really nicely positioned.
They've measured profiles of skulls from hundreds of mummies, allowing them to identify populations from different time periods and regions of Egypt. Because most of the royal mummies were rewrapped and reburied in approximately 1000 BC, their identities are questionable. Harris and Ingalls are seeking to establish a more accurate family tree of pharaohs by trying to confirm if one royal mummy appears related to another.
We have been somewhat suspicious that some of the pharaohs have not been correctly identified. And what many people don't realize is that all the pharaohs, except Tutankhamun, were found in 2 collections in Egypt, and none of them were original burials. They were all rewrapped by the priests of the 21st dynasty.
One of those 2 burial collections was here. 40 royal mummies, including Ramses II, Tutmosis I, the second, the third, and Amenhotep I, were found jammed together at the bottom of this shaft near the Valley of the Kings in 1881. Priests had hidden them there around 1000 BC after their original tombs had been looted.
The assumption has been that each pharaoh has been correctly identified. We have wondered whether or not some of the pharaohs could biologically be the son or father of the succeeding pharaoh. So we have challenged some of the identifications of the pharaohs in particularly the 18th dynasty.
In the case of Jed, there's little confusion. He was apparently in his original coffin, complete with its inscription.
It's almost like he's dislocated the scapula.
It is.
Well, the wear in his teeth, you know, which are inconsistent, but they make you think that he's older than 20.
In the mid-20s.
It's an unusual amount of wear for a 20-year-old.
The facial structure of Jed is compared with Ramses II, the longest reigning pharaoh in the New Kingdom, who had most of the monuments in the Valley of the Kings and neighboring Luxor built in commemoration of himself.
This is Ramses II here, and this is Jed. One can see an age difference as it relates to the jaws themselves. There's advanced periodontal disease and abscesses that were involved in Ramses II, but he was quite old at death. In Jed, there is not that same degree of involvement in the infrastructure of the teeth and roots, but rather there's a severe wear.
But the most startling fact about Jed was the treatment of the brain.
But then we'll see what's
going on there.
In most mummies, including Ramses, the brain had been removed via the nasal cavity. But Jed's appears to be partially intact, preserved with some substance that X-rays can't penetrate.
All this massive resin shrinks.
But you're saying that the brain is not shrunk?
That's what's amazing to me. Why?
Just that much.
That's phenomenal.
The brain is very, very different in Jed than it is in the other mummies that we've studied in Egypt, both royal and non-royal, because basically the brain was removed through the ethmoid plate, through the nose, it was dissolved, and then in its place, it's believed that material like resin, molten resin, was poured into the brain case, because the brain, number one, was thought to have no use in ancient Egypt. They did not know what the brain was for. And in Jed, we have possibly the brain that's been preserved.
Harris and Ingalls have now concluded that perhaps as much as a quarter of Jed's brain is preserved at the back of the skull, probably left there by accident. The rest of the cavity is filled up with resin. They've also compared their X-ray profile of Jed to the profiles that they have compiled of hundreds of mummies. Jed's nose and chin are typical of Nile Valley men of 3,000 years ago, thus confirming the age assigned to the body by other means. The new work has also determined that this young priest had worn teeth, but was in robust, good health just prior to his death, presumably by some sudden infection.
With all our work, this is a beginning. Always, this is just a field laboratory approach, and it's just like when we're in Egypt, we take all the material back to our laboratories and thoroughly analyze it. So this is strictly a preliminary look at this mummy and at the X-rays. And there'll be many people coming along that are much more sophisticated than we are in our approaches, as we have been from the people before us. And so we each build on the science of the time. We've got a couple X-ray plates.
The information gathered by Harris and Ingalls, coupled with other scientific methods like carbon dating and DNA analysis, add to the innovative study of ancient peoples. And none too soon. Egyptian mummies represent a precious legacy that has been nearly lost through modern indifference. Few of the millions of Egyptian mummies have survived the abuse of man and the ravages of nature, and too many lie ignored and unstudied in the storerooms of museums around the world. The ancient Egyptians believed they could assure immortality through mummification. In a way, they were right. As archaeologists and scientists continue their work, these forgotten dead reach out across the millennia to tell us about their lives, their families, and their beliefs, about their civilization and the people who built it. If we cannot put ourselves in the ancient Egyptians' minds, share their beliefs about the voyage of the soul, we can all be touched by the humanity of their remains.
By the time of the Roman Empire, Egyptian burial practices had changed. The coffins were elaborately painted, but inside, the mummified remains quickly turned to dusty skeletons. Soon the art of the mummy maker was lost, the spiritual reasons for mummification forgotten, and the superstitious fascination began. Only in our own times has science stripped away the mummy's macabre trappings and restored to us the humanity of the Egyptian dead.